Hello and welcome back to the second part of Inspirability with Sarah Stephenson-Hunter, co-founder of Simply Equality, speaker and podcaster. The thing I wanted to talk about was obviously moving then into completely losing your sight, becoming obviously part of the disabled community. Let's talk a bit about equality and inclusivity and what we can do. So, for example, at Aerobility, we've got the Equal Skies Charter, where we're talking with partners in the aviation industry about making it more accessible as careers for people with disabilities. So what do you think can be done to make the world and make careers more accessible for people with disabilities?
I think this is a two-pronged approach. I think on the one hand, you need to empower the individual. So that's why I reluctantly accept the mantle of a role model, because I am trying to show people that if you have a dream, if you have a goal, if you have ambition, then yes, there may be some practical challenges with that, but there is a way. And so that's about the individual and about empowering the individual to have that determination, that self-confidence, that resilience. But then this is where employers and in organizations, it comes down to them to take that inclusive approach. You know, you've mentioned things like aviation. And okay, look, as a blind person, I'm probably never going to independently fly a plane. You know, that's fine. I accept that. But that doesn't mean there won't be other parts of the aviation industry I couldn't be involved in. You know, if you're somebody who's a wheelchair user, okay, there may be some physical barriers to some job you want to do, but that doesn't mean there aren't other things you can do. But it also means there's a responsibility on organizations and employers to think about, just because you've done something one way for decades, centuries, doesn't mean you have to keep doing it like that, and doesn't mean you shouldn't think about how you can be more inclusive. One classic example, working from home. Pre-COVID, I had real battles when I used to support disabled people in work with getting managers to agree to working from home, even a couple of times a month. Pandemic comes along and it was awful, it was horrible, but we all had to adapt. And home working, whilst it's not the answer to everything, we showed that actually, do you know what? Lots of jobs can be done working from home, and we can still be successful and productive. But it shouldn't have taken a global pandemic to shake things up and show people that, well, why do we have to go into the physical office 9 to 5, 5 days a week? Why can't we do things different? So I think it's anything you can do as an organization to think, okay, we've got this thing we have to do, this service we have to provide, this whatever it is. But how can we make it more inclusive for people that might not think, walk, see, hear the same as everybody else? How can we just change our patterns or our processes or our work environment to make it more inclusive?
It's also, I think, I really agree with you, and I think part of that is things like the like pictures that we may use. You know, thinking from a pilot's perspective, pictures even internally could have been of a captain and a first officer, and it would be, you know, an old grey-haired white male as the captain and a young male as the first officer. And you know, now actually going, well, if we're going to have those pictures, then that's sort of what we are subconsciously promoting. And then if we have a more diverse look, then we can actually encourage people from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different genders to go, well, actually, if that person is in the flight deck, then I can be too. It's that visible role models, you know, like you were saying. And I think we're talking before about one of the previous guests was talking about air traffic controllers and how in some organizations it's fully set up for a wheelchair user to be able to be an air traffic controller, providing they pass certain other medical tests. But there are still no wheelchair users, and we just need to have one wheelchair user to sort of almost open the floodgates for people to go, yes, I can apply for that too. And it's giving people that that feeling that accessibility is there, that inclusivity is there. So, and maybe perhaps in the job applications, going, why don't we have so many women applying? Well, maybe change what words we're using in the applications or what the requirements are. But I think working from home is a really good example. So for you, how does that change what you can do work-wise? How does it change your day working from home as opposed to going to the office?
It just means that, I can do my work at home, providing I've got the technology. I can just be me in the world of work, and nobody necessarily knows that I've got a visual impairment. It's really empowering and enabling. I mean, there's always the flip side that if the technology changes, it's like, oh gosh, is this accessible now? But it does mean I'm able to give a lot more to my work and just be more present in work.
In terms of looking at equity and giving everybody that tailored support, I think that's a really good example, because rather than that energy that you're having to expend just to get to work, you can put that into your work. So when you get to work, having expended so much energy, you're arguably perhaps at a disadvantage that day in terms of what energy you have left to give to work. Whereas you can maybe perform better at your job because you've not had to do that. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I agree. And in my case, it's navigating the world as a totally blind person. But, somebody with mental ill health and anxiety, they might find the whole process of using public transport particularly stressful and anxiety producing. Somebody with another physical impairment, it just means you're already removing some of those barriers. And that's not to say everybody should all work from home all the time, because there will be certain jobs that you can't do all of it from home. And we do have to be careful not to lose connection and community. And online community is great, but there's nothing better than, being in the same space as other people. But just that flexibility and that adaptability, it allows you to play to your strengths.
And break down those barriers of accessibility, doesn't it?
And I think for me, anything that breaks down those barriers, because let's face it, most of those barriers are artificial barriers. They've been created somewhere down the line by somebody who didn't perhaps have an understanding of issues around, be it gender, disability, sexuality, mental health, whatever it might be. That wasn't in their thinking. So they created a workplace or an environment or a policy that didn't think about people different to them and how they might access that.
And we were talking earlier about equality versus equity. So tell me, what are your thoughts on equality and equity?
I think that it is an important discussion, but sometimes we can get bogged down in the semantics. And for me, I think the difference between the two is quite artificial. I know that people say, well, but, equality of treatment isn't the same as equity, and we all want equitable access to things. Yeah, I get that. But I think sometimes we're so focused on the language, we forget about what we're trying to achieve. The example I also use is there's a sort of classic image that get used in equality, diversity, inclusion circles of people trying to look over a fence at I think it's a baseball game, but let's say in this case it's a football match. You've got people of different heights trying to look over and they can't. So what do? You give them things to stand on so they can look over the fence. Fine. I would say, well, why don't we look at destroying that fence in the first place? Perhaps I'm just a bit radical. But why don't we look at ways of taking those fences away?
Absolutely.
So that it doesn't matter who you are, you're able to have that access.
You just break down that barrier. So, so we talked about your transition to becoming fully blind. But a few other things happened around that time in your life. I think earlier you described it to me as tidal wave moment. So perhaps you can shed a little bit more light on your tidal wave moment.
Absolutely. So there I am in my early 40s. So not long before I lost all my Moraine and vision, my dad died of lung and spinal cancer. And then, as I say, not long after that is when I lost all my vision. And for me, those two things combined into what I call my tidal wave moment. And that leads into, if you like, the other part of who Sarah is, that is a big part of my life. So throughout my life, I had questions around my gender identity. It's not something I was acutely aware of growing up because, as I mentioned earlier, I had all these different health issues, and that took up a lot of my emotional space, and it wasn't something I could think of, but I always felt different. And it had gone on throughout my life, even I got married in my early 20s and was involved in the Christian church and had kids. I did that because I was running away from something about who I am and who I really felt I was. And I tried to hide it, but it just never went away. But this tidal wave for me, these two things combining of the death of my father and my loss of vision, just meant I was at this stage in life where this huge wave I'd been running from, that every now and then would get close and I'd feel its metaphorical spray on my back. And when you do that, you just have to run faster to get away from it. That's exhausting. And I just got to that stage in life where I was like, I can't run anymore. I'm emotionally exhausted. I've been running for too long. And so I just decided to stop running, let this metaphorical wave wash over me. If I drown in the process, so be it. But I can't run anymore. And for me, that was the point at which I faced my feelings about my gender identity. And as terrifying as it was, because as I mentioned, I was married, I had 3 kids, I was involved in the church, and I knew that if I went down the path of exploring my gender identity, and if it went where I thought it was going to go, which was me transitioning from being born a man to transitioning to be a woman, I knew I would probably lose a lot. And I did. I began the transition process after a period of therapy and reflection. And whilst I don't regret that, and I had to do that to be me, otherwise I genuinely believe I wouldn't be here today. You know, I did lose my marriage. It did affect relationship with my kids. I did pretty much overnight lose my, I would say, so-called friends from the church. So I lost a lot. But what I did gain was that peace about who I am, my place in the world. And that's something that I will never regret.
And then how long before you felt confident to be Sarah?
Gosh, I think it's still something I struggle with every day, 11 years on. But, you know, the transition process took 3 years of socially transitioning, so changing my name at work, changing my records, changing my passport, dressing differently. Then I started hormones. Then I had gender confirmation surgery about 3 years later. So it was a long process, and throughout that process, I was still on a verge of self-discovery. And it's fair to say in those early days, as somebody navigating the world, as trans and newly blind, I did feel very, very vulnerable, self-conscious. And I had to grow into being Sarah, if you like. But it's just something that I have grown into, and 11 years on, I still have my days when you perhaps do get somebody who misgenders you or, says stuff about you. But I am Sarah. I've always been Sarah, I just didn't know that. And I'm very happy to be me. I regret the pain it's caused others, but all I can say is I have the gift of being my authentic self. And it's come at a cost, it's taken courage. But I think that's one of the best gifts we can give ourselves.
And what do you say to anybody else who is maybe not being their authentic self? Whether, in your case, it was gender identity, maybe it's being just not being too scared to be confident, to stand up to someone, to really be who they feel they are inside, in whatever sense it is. What advice would you give them?
Again, I'm not saying it's easy, and my situation was quite dramatic. It took death of a family member, loss of sight, to force me to be my authentic self. And obviously I hadn't been that because of fear, and I touched earlier about fear. I think my advice to anybody, no matter what it is that you feel you're not being true to who you really feel you are, is to trust yourself. Trust your inner knowing, your inner belief, and have that self-confidence that no matter what the world is saying to you, perhaps even family members or other loved ones are saying things to you that they mean for the right reasons, but you don't sort of gel with that. Be brave. Have courage. It's not going to be easy, but since when was anything in life worth doing easy? And it might just be a small step. It might just be when somebody asks you to do something, and instead of saying yes because you don't want to rock the boat, you say, actually, no, I can't do that at the minute, or I'm not prepared to do that. Just take those small steps. And the more you take those small steps, the more it will build. And for me, I've been Sarah for 11 years. I'm open about my transition. But it still takes daily decisions to get out in the world. Because although most people I meet are supportive and genuine, there are still those people that, either through lack of understanding or deliberateness, don't treat you how you should be treated. And that can knock your confidence. But I just try not to let it. And if you have a bad day, you have a bad day. It's just a bad day. It doesn't mean tomorrow has to be the same.
Something really important you touched on just now actually was the importance of saying no. Because I know so many of us find that so hard when you get asked, can you bake some extra cakes for the school fair? Can you take your neighbour's dog for a walk? Can you, and you just want to say yes. But then you realise that you're just spreading yourself so thinly that you're actually not focusing on things that are important and that you need to be doing. So what advice would you give to someone about the importance? Well, first of all, are you good at saying no?
No.
What advice would you give to someone about how to say no and the importance of saying no?
I mean, again, I don't want to make this sound like it's easy, because it's not. And it's like anything. The more you do something, the easier it becomes. It's going to be terrifying the first time you say no to somebody who asks you to give you a lift somewhere when you've already got a busy day and you're tired, or, as you said, bake a cake when you think, gosh, I've got to juggle the kids and everything else and I can't do that. It's going to feel awful saying no first time, but it will get easier. And I think the more you do it, the more people might stop asking. And the more you're honoring yourself, and the more that feeds your self-belief and your sense of, I do have value, and I am worthy of protecting my time and my energy and my emotions. And that puts you in a much better place to really be there for others when they need it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So more recently, you've set up Simply Equality. So can you tell me a little bit about Simply Equality and the amazing work that it's doing at the moment?
So Simply Equality has been set up recently. So we are a limited company, but we also run on the, we're actually recognised as a social enterprise. It's myself and another disabled trans person. Simply Equality really came out of the work I've been doing for years of sharing my story, breaking down barriers for disabled and LGBTQ plus people, and my own experience of, I've been disabled all my life, I've been trans all my life, but I didn't know about the transness until much later on. And I foolishly thought that because I lived in the world of disability and because I understood about discrimination and prejudice, and one area that when I entered another community, as in the LGBTQ plus community, that there'd be this similar understanding of these issues. And funnily enough, there wasn't. Just because you belong to one minority group does not mean you either understand all other minority issues or that other minority groups understand your issues. So really, Simply Equality exists to equip organizations, companies to do what they need to do to make their workplaces more inclusive. So we deliver workshops, I do talks, we do all sorts to equip organizations and then empower. That's about empowering the individual to have that inner confidence, be that through coaching, be that through, again, talks I give on sharing my journey and how it can encourage us all to be our true selves. And then embedding, that's about embedding policies, processes, procedures. That's the hard stuff, if you like. That's where the real nitty-gritty happens. But again, a lot of it can be quite simple. As we touched on earlier, just looking at what is it in your workplace that you could do different to make sure, in this case, disabled and LGBTQ plus people can feel included, but it could be any group of people. So that's really who we are. That's what we exist to do. Again, being a disabled entrepreneur has its challenges, but I'm determined to make happen and to use whatever opportunity I can to share that message.
What do you think is the main thing or the most common theme that you see in terms of workplaces, what they can do to make the LGBTQ plus community feel more included?
I think education is a good example. There's still a lot of prejudice and ignorance. So anything you can do as an organization to provide training, to get people in to give talks, to engage with LGBT organizations, to listen to your LGBT staff about their experiences, that's really important, because it's not until you really know how do your LGBTQ plus colleagues feel about working for your organization. Do they really feel included? Do they feel able to be themselves? Do they feel able to talk about what they did at the weekend with their same-sex partner without people judging them? So there's that. And then the other thing is the importance of allyship. And I'll talk about it regarding to LGBTQ plus equality, but it relates to, again, all areas of marginalisation.
It's also, I think it's camaraderie as well, in that, so we were talking to one of a previous guest, Mandy Hickson. She was the second female fast jet pilot in the Royal Air Force, second ever. And one of the things she was saying was in her training that it was just every day there were, oh, Mandy, we can see which jet you've parked. It's the one that's not straight. Ha, ha, ha. And it just got boring. Every day there'd be comments. And actually the guys on her squadron well, she was the only girl, the guys in her squadron went to the squadron boss and said, look, we're just bored of this for Mandy. So it's that camaraderie that they're in a position to actually make that change, and that avoiding that bystander theory as well. I mean, have you seen much of that bystander theory, and maybe what can people who sort of notice behaviours but think that's not right, how can they call them out?
Actually, we prefer to use calling in than calling out, only because calling out is more problematic, challenging. And you mentioned bystander. The lot of focus about responsible bystander, and yes, you should challenge, but only when you feel comfortable to do yourself. So for me, I prefer to say, well, how can you call in good behaviour? How can you call in good examples? The example we use is, so we've probably all got an embarrassing relative that when you have a family event, you just know they're going to be the one that says something politically incorrect. And they might not mean to, but you think, oh, God, no. Let's call them Uncle Steve. Apologies, anybody watching this has got an Uncle Steve. And the thing is, nobody wants to be Uncle Steve.
And Uncle Steve doesn't actually mean to harm either.
No.
Just Uncle Steve's probably just a bit,
For whatever reason, Uncle Steve is how Uncle Steve is. Doesn't mean they can't change, but hey, they haven't done yet, so they might still not. But nobody wants to be Uncle Steve. So it's about calling in positive behaviours when you see it, so that when you call out, you're not so much calling out, but you're saying, hey, Harry, you said that thing the other day at work. Actually, you may not have meant to, but that was actually quite inappropriate or offensive towards, in this case, members of the LGBTQ plus community. So yeah, it's not easy, and the whole thing about bystander training, bystander awareness is, it takes you to be the one to do it, and you have to have a bit of courage, and organizations have to create environments where people feel safe to step up and say these things. But I think it is important.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think we all have that responsibility to be approachable, particularly as leaders. You want to feel that people can come to you and say, that word you used or that phrase you used, or you probably didn't mean to cause offence, but it did. And because I think sometimes it's very hard to know which terminology is the correct terminology to use, and people can unintentionally cause offence. So what would you say to people about those situations where someone said something that they haven't meant to use a particular word, but it's actually offended someone? What's the best way to handle those scenarios?
I mean, we actually do a workshop on inclusive language with a subtitle being, you just can't have banter anymore. And I think it's true. Look, I live in this world of disability and LGBTQ plus equality. I know the terminology, but I get it wrong sometimes, and things change. And, if you had a group of blind people together, we'd probably all use slightly different words to describe ourselves in terms of visually impaired, serious sight loss, serious visual impairment. So if we can't do that, then I think we have to acknowledge, how can others out there who haven't had this experience, how can we expect them to understand? So it's not about policing language, but it's about just acknowledging that, we as individuals will have come from our own particular experience and background, and we may not have all of the knowledge we need to have. And certainly when it comes to LGBT issues, trans issues in particular, people will be like, well, I don't know what to use and what words to use. And, you're just trying to say you can't use the word woman anymore. So no, we're just trying to say that perhaps think that not everyone is going to have had the same experience as you. So think about the words you're using. But if you get it wrong, don't be the one that goes, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I'm so dreadful, I'm such a bad person. But no, just thank somebody for saying to you, actually, that's not the word we use anymore. Be gracious enough to thank them and commit to doing better the next time. I get people that say to me, "Oh, you're blind, Sarah. Does that mean I can't use the word, 'Did you see this on television?' Or come and watch this?" I'm not going to jump on you if you use that word, because most people aren't blind, and that's just a word you use. I understand what you mean when you say that, but again, it's just being aware of language, but not being too uptight about getting things wrong. And then if you do get it wrong, saying, "Yep, okay, sorry, I'll do better next time."
I think something you touched on earlier also was creating this safe space where LGBTQ plus people can feel comfortable in talking about themselves, express themselves as they are. I think in a broader context, it's the responsibility of organisations, but also people as well, being approachable, but to create these situations of psychological safety. Can you tell us a little bit about psychological safety?
Psychological safety is such an important, it's not even a concept, it's a reality of creating an environment where people feel safe to, I'm going to use the word disclose, because disclosure is fitting to disability and LGBT identities. So psychological safety in a workplace would mean you've created an environment where somebody feels safe to say that they have a disability, or to come and disclose that to a manager, and that's going to be treated properly. And it won't be like, "Oh my gosh, this is a massive deal and what we're going to do about it." It will also mean that I, as somebody who identifies as a lesbian woman, can be in work and I can talk about going out with my girlfriend or my wife, and not feeling like I shouldn't say that because I will be judged or people will snicker or whatever. So it's creating that environment where people feel safe to be themselves, but also, if, as we mentioned a minute ago, somebody does say something, that either I can be the one that says, "Well, actually, what you just said there, that's actually quite hurtful," or where you feel you can go to a manager or a leader and say, "You know, I shared this about my life and somebody said this, and actually that wasn't helpful." And you know it's going to be treated properly and followed up, and things will be put in place so that doesn't happen again.
What are your top tips for any organisation trying to create this psychological safety, and how crucially important it is?
I think leaders do set the tone. So I think any of you watching this who are leaders, you really need to be somebody who's open, who creates psychological safety by admitting some of your own vulnerabilities, insecurities, the fact you may not understand all these things, so that people feel able to come up to you. So I think leadership sets a tone. I think having appropriate policies on bullying and harassment, so that people know if something does happen, that they can report it, it will be followed up, and appropriate, and I stress the word appropriate, action will be taken. And I think also psychological safety is created by having, be it an ERG, an employee resource group, or a staff network of like-minded or similarly identified people. So you have that environment where you can go and talk about what it's like to be a trans person in the workplace, or a disabled person. And you can get that support. And you just go into a space where you don't have to explain what it means to live as a disabled person. You're talking to somebody else who gets it, and you can have that discussion.
So what are the projects that you're working on at the moment with Simply Equality?
So we are actually about to launch a course called Future-Proofing Your Organisation Through Inclusion, which is all about, as you just touched on, how can you create inclusive workplaces, And we specifically focus on areas around neurodivergence, around LGBT equality, disability equality, inclusive language. So it's about how can you as an organisation put those things in place. We're also working with the Sunflower Lanyards scheme, the charity that you may have all seen the lanyards, but they work globally. So we're delivering webinars for new organisations that sign up to that to show them, what is the scheme about, how important is it, what does it mean, and we have our core workshops that we do on those topics I've mentioned.
So one thing that you mentioned that I would really like to touch on is neurodivergence. So can you share a little bit with us about what it means and what we can do in order to to remove barriers, really break down barriers for members of that community?
Again, neurodivergence has become a bit of a buzzword and a trendy thing, but all it means is it's a grouping of people that would come under the umbrella of being neurodivergent. That are people with conditions like autism, ADHD, OCD, Tourette's actually comes under there as well, dyspraxia, dysgraphia. Those conditions that mean that people think and perceive and engage in the world differently. And so a lot of the work we do around creating what we would class as neuro-inclusive environments is again thinking about what is it you're doing as an organisation that means perhaps somebody that does interact with the world differently can feel supported. So again, an example, lots of organisations have big open plan offices. We all seem to think they're wonderful. But if you're somebody who's autistic or ADHD, and you're particularly susceptible to noise distraction, sensory overload, that is just a horrid environment. It's not going to allow you to work to your best. So thinking about, certainly if you're able to, perhaps redoing your office so it's got appropriate lighting, or you've got dividers between desks, or even better, you've got smaller offices for people to go and work in. Or perhaps not having somebody who's autistic at a desk that's next to the kitchen, because the smell can be so disconcerting for them that it really puts them off. Or allow them to take more regular breaks if somebody with ADHD who can focus but needs to have short breaks. So there's a whole range of things that you can do, which is what we try and highlight and focus.
So Sarah, some of your hobbies then that we were talking about, some of the really exciting things you've done. So would you like to share with us some of the incredible activities you've been up to?
Yeah, I don't know what it is about me, but I think I like a bit of adventure. So although I wasn't allowed to do PE at school or anything, for a combination of reasons, I started running probably 6 or 7 years ago. I started doing it because I wanted to see if I could. I did a couch to 5K and I just kept going. So I've done 10Ks, I've done half marathons, and call me a bit crazy, but I am signed up to do London Marathon 2025.
Fantastic. I will see you there.
Well, indeed.
So who are you running for? It's for another charity?
Yes, so I have a charity place for Stonewall, which is an LGBTQ plus organisation, so I'm raising funds for them. Something I care deeply about. So that'll be good. Also, what else have I done? I've walked on fire to raise money, and I actually ended up doing that with some members of the England women's cricket team. That's another story.
So why did you decide to walk on fire?
I, again, decided to walk on fire because it sounded like
a good idea at the time.
Why not? And what was really interesting is before you do the actual walking on fire, you have like a workshop, which is all about mentality and positive mindset. And it's not a trick. Those coals can hurt. But the biggest thing is having the courage to step onto them in the first place. So that was really good to do that. I've also abseiled down a 200-foot hotel.
Oh my goodness.
Because again, why not? I just like to push the barriers, and if somebody tells me I can't do something, I want to say, well, I'll at least give it a try.
That's incredible. Honestly, Sarah, hearing your story, hearing the things you've done, it's just so inspiring. And on top of that, you're writing a book.
Yes. So I know writing a book sounds very self-indulgent, but actually I've realized the more I do these kind of things and share my story that it is quite a unique story. And there are elements that, my situation is going to be about my journey in LGBT identity, disability, plus aspects of faith in there. But there's a lot in it I believe is applicable to anybody, no matter who you are, no matter what challenges you face in life. So I am writing it with a friend. It is going to be called Seeing Things Differently. I know, nice plain words. Can't quite tell you when it's going to be out yet, but watch this space. It will be out. And I hope, again, it is about me, but I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about that universal experience of facing challenges in life and whatever cards you're dealt in life, finding ways to flip your understanding and your perspective on that and try and live the best life you can.
And if you could go back to Sarah, say at 20, what would you say?
I would say, I know you're scared, but do it. And by do it, I mean, even at 20, I knew that I wasn't being true to myself. And I was scared about what impact it would have on those around me. And I let that determine too much of my life. But I would say, don't be scared, take a deep breath and do it. It may not be easy, but do it. It will pan out okay.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a very powerful conversation. I think there's a lot of themes that we've explored today and a lot that is very applicable to anybody listening. So thank you for your time. I wish you luck. Best of luck with Simple Equality. It's a fantastic organisation. I'm really excited to hear more about where you go with it, what you do. I hope you'll keep in touch and keep us updated. And your book, I can't wait to read it. Do let me know when it's released.
Absolutely. You'll be at the launch, don't worry.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I look forward to my invite. And good luck with the London Marathon and your training. I hope it goes really well. Best of luck with that. You're going to do incredibly well with that. I remember you telling me your time, what you're hoping for, which is remarkable. So best of luck. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for sharing your story with everybody. Best of luck for the future. Keep in touch.
It's been a real pleasure.
You're very welcome.